I think that probably the biggest issue or topic from R3 is risk proportionality. It's, this risk-based approach that we've heard about over and over again, and everyone's really hesitant to go out there and say, okay, should I really do that, or should I just stick with the tried and true?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this very exciting episode of State of TMF. Today we are going to be talking about ICH E6R3, which had its final version approved by the ICH members in January, so last month. So very exciting. It's been a long time coming. There's a lot of new stuff in there, a lot of interesting things that we want to talk about. So today I am joined with two industry veterans. I think I can call them veterans at this point. I'm sure they won't mind. So Joanne Malia from Regeneron and Karen Roy from Epista, and others, the CDISC and is it ICR? ICR in the UK, right? Yeah, ICR. Very busy person. So for those of you that don't know Joanne and Karen, I don't think there are many of you that don't know Joanne and Karen, but just for the record, can I ask you guys to introduce yourselves?
I'm Joanne Malia. I head up the Development Records Management Group at Regeneron, and I've been a member of the TMF Reference Model for many years, and have been on the steering committee for several. I have lost track.
And I'm Karen Roy, and I chaired the steering committee since 2014 when it started, but I've been on the reference model, so co-founder since 2009, and I'm very pleased to say that I handed over to Fenton-Carter at the beginning of this year. So handed over in good hands, and I'm still on the steering committee as an exiting chair or a past chair, something like that. I also work as a consultant for Epista, supporting TMF implementations, etc. And I'm on the ICR board, as Paul said, which is one of the reasons then that I actually, because I'm in the UK, got to go to the MHRA meeting yesterday. So I don't know if anybody else online was at the MHRA meeting yesterday, but it was fabulous. And Joanne was online there, and I was there, so we could talk about that. But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you both of you for taking the time to be here. And I know that we're going to be in really good hands with your knowledge and expertise. Maybe I'll just quickly introduce myself. So Paul Fenton-Carter, I'm the CEO of Montreal. As Karen said, I'm also the new chair of the TMF Reference Model. So very busy right now with all of the different things that we're preparing for V4 of the reference model. And I will be hosting, of course, our episode of State of TMF today. So with that said, let's maybe get started. So ICH E6R3, we've been talking about it for a long time. I'm gonna ask Joanne and Karen, in your opinion, what are the most important changes that we see in the final version of E6R3, and changes that really impact the TMF? What are the things that we should be looking at?
I think that probably the biggest issue or topic from R3 is risk proportionality. It's, this risk-based approach that we've heard about over and over again, and everyone's really hesitant to go out there and say, okay, should I really do that, or should I just stick with the tried and true? It's gotten me through inspections before, but now I think the regulators are really pushing us to take that leap, and they want to do it with us. So.
Absolutely. And I think what was interesting, Joanne, yesterday was so it's the MHRA GCP forum that I will be referring back to quite a lot, what was really interesting, I think, was the fact that they were saying they actually thought that we were all going to start having dreams about risk and actually saying the word risk in our sleep. Risk proportionalized, risk assessment. And I do want to just do a quick plug, Joanne, for the initiative that I know I'm sure we'll talk about it, but obviously there's the initiative that you did at the reference, that you led for the reference model. And that was specifically around risk and TMF?
Yes. That initiative dealt with risk, looking at risk, for the TMF especially, but it resulted in a white paper and a tool kit that will be coming soon. And we will include some training around that so people know how to really view this, understand the white paper, and how to use the tool.
And I need to do a plug now for the TMF conference in Geneva, because Joanne's going to be talking about the initiative, and Marion Mays is going to be doing the tool, talking about the actual risk tool.
Right. And it's definitely a hot topic, right? But I think one of the things that I think a lot of organizations are sort of challenged with today is, well, what's, how do I do this? What's the framework? What are the expectations from the regulators? Because obviously there's no sort of specification, if you like, for a risk-based framework that they're giving us. So we kind of have to come up with it ourselves. And so do you think, there are other areas maybe of clinical where they've been doing, risk-based approaches for a while that we could start to look at? I'm thinking about like monitoring and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's risk-based monitoring, which has sort of been something that was touted around and for quite a long time. But I think what they're talking about is taking it way back. So actually having a risk plan started before you even start the protocol. And I think there's going to be a lot of support the industry is going to need specifically around that. How do you take a risk-based view when it comes to what assessments you're going to be doing, when it comes to how you're going to capture the data, what committees you're going to have, all that sort of thing. And I think what the overall message for me was very much a quality. We talked about this earlier, quality by design. They talked about critical quality factors. So really building in quality at the start, but taking a pragmatic approach. So we've sort of got to the point now with clinical trials where we're just collecting everything. And I think what they're saying is pare it back. Don't collect more than you need. Don't do more than you need, which obviously goes against what a lot of us have done through our lives. So I think it's going to be interesting.
With ICH M11 and obviously digital protocol, where they're starting to define exactly in digital terms how we need to structure the protocol. Will they start to also integrate aspects of critical quality factors and quality by design and even risk into that template, into that digital protocol template, so that we can start to leverage them? Because I think obviously as a TMF community, we're very interested in ICH M11 and being able to leverage this sort of very structured protocol, set of protocol information to be able to drive our processes within TMF. And so I think that it would be logical for them to start to maybe do that, but I'm not sure how easy it is, but something to think about.
Yeah, I don't know if they actually thought about it in a technical term, but they were basically saying that it all starts with the protocol and that thoughtful conversation that you need to have at the beginning of what is it that we really want? What is it that we need from this clinical study or this trial, so that you're really thinking about all of this before you put pen to paper. And then hopefully it will make the writing and review and implementation of the protocol so much easier.
I think it's all very siloed though, because I was asking one of the regulators I spoke to yesterday, what do you know about M11 and the digital protocol? And they were like, nothing. So
really?
It's so very much, very, very siloed. This is one of the inspectors that was involved in ICH E6R3. They're not working across the board. So it'll be interesting to try and plug it all together.
Yeah, because it kind of needs to be plugged together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so what, I mean, obviously, so we spoke about risk and quality by design, but anything else within I6 that you think, E6R3, that you think is really important to TMF?
So I have one thing, which is the fact that they've changed the names of lots of things. So essential documents, essential records, participant, subject is now participant, site is location, CRO vendor service provider. And that's obviously going to have, whilst not material differences in terms of the actual content, significant difference in terms of the actual model.
Yeah. Right. And I think, as for the reference model, it's going to be important that we start to look at this, especially as we go into V4, to make sure that we're aligning with that terminology, right? So I think that's definitely something that's critical. Yeah, I noticed that too, and I'm actually quite pleased that they're now referring to essential records rather than essential documents, because it just makes more sense, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think they also, throughout the whole document, they made it more understandable. I think in the past, when we would get guidance documents, the actual meaning behind the words was not always clear, so that you really had to talk to regulators more to really understand exactly what they were getting at. This is pretty clear, and they were very straightforward, I think, in their terminology. I also think in the area of the TMF, they've sort of broadened the expectations for us, so that we now have to consider not only, the TMF itself, but also those quality management areas that support our, like our SOPs, our training. Not that we forgot about it before, but we have to figure out, okay, if there is an inspection, where are these documents? Are they being treated appropriately by our staff, so that we can easily pull some of these things? I mean, Karen was just talking about the vendor quality and oversight documents that have been added to the list. And I think we probably have considered those, but didn't really think of them as essential documents for a particular TMF.
I think it's the same for everything to do with sort of CSV as well. There's a lot of discussion around that, and sort of reference, actually clear reference to the fact that we need to know exactly where those records are, and they have to be well maintained. So it's definitely something that we have to sort of think about as well, as a community and as a reference model. I saw there was a question come in from Russell for you, Karen. It says specifically for you.
What was the rationale for changing the established nomenclature? Interested to know the thinking or meaning behind that. I think, as in Russell, I'm assuming you're asking why ICH decided to change to different things. I think it's because there was a logic behind every single one. So that, like, for example, subject becoming participant, they were explaining that a participant is actually somebody who's taking part, as opposed to someone that's being subjected to. So it was actually explaining it better from that perspective. And I think record is, it's been records management for years. Everyone's always talked about records management, but we've got into the habit of documents. And I think one of the key reasons that it would have gone to a record as opposed to document is we're in a digital world, and we're moving to data. We're moving to, it's not going to be documents. It's not going to be that piece of paper. It's going to be records that get signed, that can be visualized as a thing, but they won't actually be documents. And I think that was probably the reason behind some of those. And I think the logic behind the third party vendors, service provider, moving to service provider, is because there's become so many blurred lines between what a CRO does versus what a technology vendor does versus what a technology service provider does versus etc. And they're all providers of something to the pharmaceutical industry. So I think they try to capture it like that. That's what I see happening effectively.
Makes sense. All right, so I want to switch tack a little bit. Now, obviously, we're all very passionate about the TMF reference model. And I was just wondering, I know that both of you are very, very much involved, as am I. Did ICH actually consult with the reference model when they were sort of looking at Appendix C and the revision of the essential documents to essential records?
So interesting. We've been trying for years to get, especially the MHRA, to say they will back the reference model, and they've never said that. So Jamie Toth and I got to go to the MHRA meeting as stakeholders. I went as the reference model. She went as HSRIA. And we got to comment on ICH-E6R3. We put the comments into EMA, FDA, MHRA, and I think we might have even done the PMDA as well. I think we tried to hit every possible option. There was a couple of things that we managed to comment on. One of them was originally they had essential and potentially essential, and that was going to cause all sorts of chaos. So we asked them, please, and they did that. They've made just one table at the back. We also asked them to please get rid of the numbering, because to have separate numbering would have been, and we're very pleased to see that. We did ask them to get rid of the list altogether, because we voted at one of our reference model meetings. Unfortunately, they didn't. But I did hear from one of the regulators yesterday that there was a lot of debate about the essential records table, and that it was streamlined as much as possible, and that the criteria, the evaluation criteria in C31, I think it's still C31, are the most important thing. So here's an example records, but it's not everything.
So it's not a definitive list.
Yeah, it's not a definitive. I don't think, and they will always say it's not a definitive list.
Right.
Yeah. And that hasn't changed from the previous versions too. Right?
Yeah,
But so the criteria I actually find. I mean, I've read through them several times, and I think they're actually, my opinion is they're quite helpful. What you guys think about them?
Yeah.
I think they're great because since we've been told that the list has not been definitive, this gives you the criteria so that if you're coming up with new documentation or records, you can use that as your decision guide to really determine if it needs to go in or not.
Yeah, I think it will definitely, I think, help us make those decisions and hopefully get a more sort of focused TMF at the end of the study. Because as you said, Joanne, and I think the message is, I can't remember if it was Joanne or Garen that said that, but the message was, think about what we're doing and don't overdo it. And I think, with TMF. I think we tend to overdo it because we're just not sure, right? So it's better just to put it in, sort of. But I think these criteria definitely will help us make better decisions. I couldn't really see anything missing in that list of criteria. Was there anything that came to your mind?
No, one of the things that we actually fed back was that some of the they've added in criteria from the first time, because we actually asked them to cross-reference the list that was there. It was shorter, and they've definitely added in some more. I think the criteria cover everything. I don't think the list of documents covers everything, but I don't think it's stop people using the reference model, because the reference model, what we will do as part of V4 is we will cross-check that essential table list with the reference model to make sure that everything that's in the table is in the reference model. So I don't think there's anything missing, and hopefully it's not going to cause confusion with people going, "Oh, we need to follow ICH-E6R3 now," because I think the two work together quite nicely.
No, and I think we definitely. So we're talking about putting in place a specific group that's going to focus on harmonization with E6R3, and I think it will require us changing potentially some of the artifacts or sub-artifacts so that we do align. I think it makes sense to align. And obviously changing artifact names can be complex, but we've got time to do it. And there was a couple of questions in the chat asking, what's the timeline for V4? There's no definitive timeline right now because there's still a lot of things that are in flux, but we're expecting the whole exercise to take around 2 years. So it's not coming tomorrow. It's probably more likely to be at the earliest end of 2026 because there is so much that we have to review and focus on, and there are going to be important changes because we're moving towards a digital standard, but also we need to align more with things like ICH E6R3, but also with things like ICH M11 digital protocol and digital data flow. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to look at. But I think
can we do a bit of a plug here because like Cassie said, hope it resolves the puzzle situation for TMF staff. And there were a couple of other people who commented on V4 and wanting a lot from it. The only way we're going to get a lot from it is if people have got to give their comments, tell us where they're having problems with it. There's a link where we can people can provide comments to V4, because I think we need to know from the world out there what's causing the stress. I mean, I know training records causes stress. I know everybody goes, well, where do you put investigator training records versus GCP training, etc. And actually, that was a very interesting discussion yesterday. There was a lot of discussion about that, about not needing to have training records for people that are doing things where it's their standard practice. So if a nurse takes a blood pressure, and that's what they normally do as part of them, they do not need to be trained as part of the protocol. However, if they are using a new digital device or something, then they need to be trained.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that the individual who is taking, for example, the blood pressure needs to know who to tell or how to document it if it is abnormal.
Yeah.
So
they the just whole need SAE process and AE process, absolutely.
Right.
So we've spoken about the criteria. We also sort of spoke about the table of essential records and the changes that we see in there. Do you feel that essential records table is fit for purpose? Is it better than what we had before with the essential documents? The 3 different sections of essential documents in the previous version of V6.
Yeah, I just think that it has to have that big caveat. This is not the final list of every document that you would need in the TMF. People need to just remember that it's a representative sample.
Yeah.
The other part that we commented on, which we haven't really touched on, but is really important, is the investigator. So last time we had a column which said these go to the sponsors, these go to the investigators. We don't really have that anymore. There's very little guidance. No. Sometimes the sponsors will have to we'll have to have documents that are specifically sponsor-related documents, and sometimes the investigators will keep investigator-related documents, but it doesn't actually say anything else like that. So it's not very clear what goes where. And that's why I think the investigator site file index that's coming out, and one of the questions was, does it include the investigator? Does version 4 include the ISF? And yes, version 4 will include the ISF, maybe not immediately, but the ISF model is being done alongside. And I think that's going to be essential, because I think people are going to go, well, what on earth do we put in the investigator site file now?
Right. Yeah, and we're also sort of integrating. There's a bunch of different changes that have been requested by the ISF group as part of V4, and so those changes are being sort of reviewed right now, and will obviously be integrated so that it becomes compliant and compatible. But yeah, I think that's really key, because I think understanding, what goes where is super important, and we don't necessarily get that from the table of essential records, right? So
no, C210. I found it now. Sorry,
yeah.
Some records are typically maintained and retained by the sponsor, or only by the investigator, and it gives examples. And some records may be retained by just one or the other. But on the other hand, it says about they need access to each other. There was a big discussion about not duplicating records as well, but just giving people access. And I'm very curious to see how that changes, whether because before everyone was like, well, the investigators has to have their documents and control over their documents, and the sponsor has their documents and control over it. And I wonder if they're going to relax that a bit and have it so that it's less, you both have to have control over your own documents, and more that you have to have access to your documents and at the end a copy of. I asked the question, but they never actually asked, and it never made it, unfortunately, to the front.
The other thing that I saw in there as well, which I thought was interesting, is they were referencing records that can go across studies. So and I think they called out specifically the investigator brochure. So they're starting now to talk about sort of kind of product level records, which is kind of interesting, because we're also talking about that right now within the context of V4, and whether we should have a product level to make it easier to share those kinds of records across studies. And as you were just talking about, Karen, instead of like copying them multiple times, well, we could just reference them, reference them and have one source of the truth.
It feels a little bit like they've pushed us in the direction of having everything duplicated, and then suddenly gone, hang on, this isn't the most practical thing, and they're taking a step back. So I think it's going to get easier.
Yeah. No, and I think it makes sense. I mean, it really does. And, I think that's why we're also discussing it as a reference model. So there are a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm just gonna read them out. So this is from, I think it's pronounced Teja or Cheja Manava. With flexible study designs and the ability to adapt protocols as new data emerges, could there be a future shift towards conducting all three phases of a clinical trial under a single protocol submission?
In all honesty, I'm not equipped to answer that question. I am sure we're going to see the world change completely, Teja, with the digital protocols, with the way we use data, but I don't know.
Well, the meeting yesterday not only talked about R3, but also the MHRA clinical trial regulation.
It's going through government next week.
Right. Week. And I think that they are really trying to streamline their process to make it easier for sponsors and others to actually do some stuff that would be easier for people to do, but they really didn't focus on that a lot because it's not final yet, and it could change.
Yeah. I mean, I know sort of I saw examples during COVID of kind of rolling designs. Where it was almost as if it was one protocol, but there were a bunch of different studies. But I don't know if that was sort of specific to COVID, given the circumstances. So there's another question. I'm not sure if we have the answer, but we'll try. So from Oliver. And a new focus in R3 was the focus on quality by design, with mention of critical quality factors. What are some examples of critical quality factors in a TMF environment or connected to TMF processes?
So I've got some thoughts on this. So I think that what we're being asked to do with R3 is to really look at our overall processes. And a very easy example to look at is like, how many documents do we quality check? Do we do 100% of documents? And do we do 100% of documents regardless of the type of study? So I think the critical to quality factors is really around what's going to make a difference to that particular study. And if it's a study, I mean, the one the examples we were talking about was a pediatric study where you have to get people to take a drug that hadn't been used in kids before, etc., etc. And obviously the critical to quality things are like the consent and this. Whereas if you're specifically looking at a TMF, it's like, how important is it for all of these things to be done? So say, for example, you're working with a CRO and you've used them for the last 10 years and you've checked them out and you've assessed them and you're very happy with the work that they've done and their TMFs have been delivered in a good quality state. How critical is it that you then check every single one of their documents? Or if you're working with sites that you've used before, etc. Whereas if maybe you've got a brand new CRO or a brand new vendor that you're working with, and you don't know how well they're going to be doing, and maybe they're working in a country you don't have the experience with, etc., then it might be more critical to quality to actually go and do many more checks, whether it's individual document checks or cross checks or whatever it might be. So I think it goes back to the risk paper that you put together, Joanne.
Right. Yeah. It all starts with the protocol and really what the requirements are from that protocol. And everything that we're talking about today deals with risk proportionality. So you really have to look at your situation, that specific study, to determine, the exactly what Karen's saying. Is it a known entity that you're dealing with, or is this brand new? Or is this maybe a whole new therapeutic area that maybe you're not really sure about? So a lot of it goes to that old adage, it depends.
Yeah. I mean, I've also been thinking a lot about this recently, and I think that we could have sort of a baseline, like a starting point where we sort of identify certain processes within a typical clinical trial design that are more critical than others. And so we can kind of start to classify them and baseline them. And then afterwards, obviously, as you said, Joanne, looking at the protocol to understand, okay, is this standard, or is there something new here, something novel, something that's going to change the risk criticality of this particular area or process within the protocol. So, like, for example, you may have a certain risk level for, say, drug distribution, but then if there are challenges around drug distribution due to temperature or things like that, so very specific to a protocol, well, maybe that changes the criticality of that particular aspect. So I think having that baseline could be really useful. And then I also think that usually within the study, we typically will do a risk assessment at the beginning of the study, right, in relation to the various different aspects of the protocol. And then we'll sort of keep that up to date as things evolve, as we have protocol amendments and things like that. And so I think also sort of hooking into that from the TMF is of interest, and the TMF teams definitely should be sort of consulted on that and be able to access that, so that they can then start to establish, what should they be focusing on in terms of quality management within the TMF based on those risk factors that have been identified for the study. I think that's something that we don't always do, and I think we should be. And probably with this requirement now to really be focusing on critical to quality and risk management will push us in that direction.
The other thing that's really, really important, Paul, is to make sure people understand that risk isn't a once and done.
Right.
You don't go, okay, we're going to take a risk-based approach and we're going to look at this and this and this and half of this.
Yeah.
Because that might work for study A, but for study B, you might need as you said, a completely different thing. So it needs to be, you can't take a systematic approach to it. It has to be a study-based approach, which is why I think the regulators, what they're going to do, and I think they're going to change the way. It was really interesting yesterday because the MHRA are changing how they're inspecting completely. I mean, they're not set in stone, but they're going to have 5 categories, A, B, C, D, and E, of different types of inspections. And some of them I took photographs of it somewhere. Some of them are going, we'll get the slides, I'm sure, but some of them are going to be sort of a systematic, not involving sites, not involving vendors, but across the company. Some of them are going to be very much on an MAA basis. Some of them are going to be for cause, and some of them will involve sites, and some of them involve service providers, and some won't. So I think they're going to take a very, very different approach. But I truly believe what they're going to do, in the same way they look at the TMF plan when they come in and they look at the protocol, I think they're going to look at the risk plan. I think they're going to look at okay, how did you approach risk in this study? What did you do? Can you justify what you did? And then, okay, this is what you did. Now, they might disagree with the justification that you've come up with, but if they can see the logic in how you've done it, I think they're going to be fine.
And I think one of the things they did bring up as part of that discussion was the fact that the industry hesitates going into this risk-based model approach, whatever you want to call it, because they are concerned about what different inspectors would say. And they basically did come out and say they are aware that the industry is concerned about this. And they have a number of initiatives that they are trying to put forth this year to make sure that inspectors know how to inspect for risk-based approaches, so that hopefully we won't get, well, FDA likes this and EMA likes that, and there'll be less of it anyway, so that there'll be more consistency.
It'll be interesting. It's a very quick one, and then I'm going to let you say your interesting point, Karen. So one thing that I've always looked quite closely at is the PICS guidance. So the Pharmaceutical Inspectorate Collaboration Scheme, and this is obviously the guidance that inspectors typically use to perform inspections. And it would be interesting if PICS maybe put something together around risk-based frameworks. I'm not sure if they have, but if they haven't, I mean, it could be interesting for them to do that, so that we can get a better understanding.
They were talking about PICS yesterday. I was just looking to see what notes. They were talking about the MHRA, 56 regulatory authorities, and the GCP is chaired by the MHRA, and they're looking at standardization on a risk-based approach.
So that's good.
Yeah, so I
think that's what we should be looking to to understand how they intend to inspect it.
Can I just answer a question that Brenda put up, just because I think it's quite interesting, it ties into what we're saying, where she was saying, would it be more confusing if there are different quality activities based on vendor or previous history with an investigator? How would you handle it in the TMF plan? I actually think that's the whole point of what we're going to have to do, is we're going to have to tailor things. So I think the TMF plan isn't going to be the same from study to study to study, because you're going to have a risk plan that's going to then drive your TMF plan. So the upfront, I think, is going to be more challenging, because you're going to have to make decisions about certain things. And I guarantee there's going to be technology that comes out where you plug everything in and it spews out what you have to do. Equally, there are going to be, people developing different algorithms and flowcharts and whatever to say, okay, how are we going to do risk on this particular study?
And I think that one of the big challenges is that there are so many different factors that you have to consider when it comes to taking a risk-based approach. There's a lot of different things, and trying to sort of plug all of that into an algorithm, I think, is challenging. Having looked at it from a technology standpoint. There was a comment from Gabriella. A question rather. How could we manage different understandings of the criticality of specific documents? Could we consider recommendations on the level of criticality, e.g. scale of 1 to 5, captured in the reference model? So it's been discussed in the past that the problem is that risk is in the eye of the beholder, right? So each organization has to decide the different levels of risk that they consider different artifacts to be at. And so for that reason, I don't think the reference model can define that, because the reference model also can't be responsible for that. If like, for example, we define something as low risk and you go through an inspection and it ends up, well, actually it was quite high risk, the reference model can't dictate risk level because they don't want to be responsible as well for your interpretation. So something that we probably would never do. I don't know if Joanne, Karen, you had any other thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think that the level of risk that a company chooses to accept is dependent on their situation. What a large pharmaceutical company might assume versus a smaller pharmaceutical company could be radically different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, I mean, like everyone's going to agree, regulatory approval is critical, and ethics approval is critical. But the laboratory ranges, if your primary endpoint is a laboratory result for a central laboratory, that's a critical document. If it's just for bloods for safety and that, it's not such a critical document. So I think it's there are going to be some very obvious ones that everyone's going to want, and then the rest of them are going to be like, well, it depends, which is what they answered yesterday, Jan, wasn't it? Half the questions that they were asked were like, well, it depends.
Yeah.
All right, so we're coming to the end of our talk today, and I'm sure that we could carry on for another hour easily, but just any sort of final thoughts or things that you guys would like to see in maybe ICH E6 R4. So the next version of good clinical practice. Anything you'd like to see in there?
I can tell you R4 needs to include the reference model.
I knew you were going to say that. That's why I asked the question.
Gonna get it into R4 come hell or high water. No, I think it addresses a lot of things. It allows R3 at least takes into consideration all the systems. I mean, there was a lot of discussion yesterday about technology and systems and investigators and the stress that investigator goes through. There was talk about long-term archiving, and at least it's standardized at 25 years now. There's a lot more that's been incorporated. I think the move to more real-world studies, decentralized. They were asked if they were going to do a decentralized some sort of guidance on decentralized trials, not from the MHRA at the moment. There is an EMA paper that's out on decentralized trials, but I think that sort of shift will mean things will change. But I think R3 covers it off as far as I can tell.
Yeah. I think they purposely tried to make it flexible so that each time there was a new technology or method out there, they didn't have to try to figure out, well, how do we address this in the guidance?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I agree. I think it's definitely an improvement. And it sets us up for the future as well in terms of technology and sort of more of a data-driven approach. So definitely it's welcome. So now I suppose we just have to get busy implementing all of the different changes that we'll need to implement to support it. So we've come to the end of our discussion. So I'd like to thank Joanne and Karen for an amazing discussion. There's a lot of really good insights. Karen and Joanne, also thank you for attending the MHRA event because it was very timely. We got lots of interesting viewpoints hot off the press. And thank you to the audience for asking all of the questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all of the questions, but very engaging discussion from the audience as well. And we hope that you enjoyed today's discussion. I'm sure this isn't the last time we're going to be talking about R3. With that, I will close today's podcast. We will be, of course, hosting other episodes of State of TMF. So we'll be reaching out to you to let you know when those are happening and what the topics are. And I'd like to wish everybody a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the State of TMF. If you liked today's episode, hit the subscribe button, view the full episode with video on YouTube, And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook to see the sometimes entertaining and always resourceful content we post every single day. See you at the next episode.